The first thing I heard when I picked up my sister's call was sobbing, not gentle crying, the kind of broken, hiccuping gasps that meant something had shattered past fixing. "Who did you call?" Megan whispered. "Mom just saw him walk in and she's—" Andrea, oh my God, she's on her knees in front of everyone. I was sitting in my car in my own driveway, 25 minutes away, still wearing the apron I'd been cooking in for 2 straight days. I should have felt guilty. But here's what none of them understood yet. What happened at that party didn't start when I walked out. It started 18 months earlier, with a phone call my mother made sure I never received. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. I'm Andrea, 33, a certified public accountant who traded a corner office for a home office and a client list I built from scratch. My family called that unemployment. This is the story of a birthday party. 50 guests, 2 days of cooking, and 1 phone call that made my mother's world come undone. Drop a comment if you've ever been the invisible one in your family, and be sure to subscribe. My mornings used to start at 6 sharp, coffee, heels, I-78, west to the Brennan and Associates office in Morristown. 7 years of that commute. 7 years of tax season migraines, partner meetings, and client dinners where I smiled until my face hurt. 18 months ago, I quit. Not a breakdown, not a fight. I just stopped wanting to build someone else's firm when I could build my own. My apartment in Ridgewood was small, a studio above a dry cleaner, but the desk by the window was mine. That Tuesday morning, I was reconciling quarterly expenses for Lena Park's flower shop, my 3rd client. 4th, if you counted the church. My phone buzzed between spreadsheets. Lena confirming Friday delivery schedules. A new inquiry from a pet grooming business on Oak Street. Then Megan. "Andrea, Mom said you'll help with my party this weekend? 50 people. She said you're free." I held the phone away from my ear for a second. Not because I was surprised. This was how it worked. Mom volunteered me for things the way people volunteer old furniture. Casually, assuming no one has a better use for it. But Megan was turning 37. She'd been my best friend before she was my sister, and I wanted the party to be good. "I'll cook," I said. "But I need help with setup and cleanup. Tables, chairs, decorations. I can't do all of it alone." Sure, Megan said. "We'll all pitch in." I believed her. Or I told myself I did, which, looking back, was the same trap I'd been falling into since I was old enough to hold a dish towel. I drove to my parents' house Friday after my last client call. 25 minutes on Route 17, past the strip malls and the Wendy's, where I'd had my first job at 16. The house hadn't changed. A beige ranch on Maple Lane with a flag out front and a lawn. Ray Foster mowed every Saturday like it was a religious obligation. I carried in my laptop bag and a canvas tote of professional-grade knives, my own spice kit, and a digital meat thermometer. Dad was in his recliner, TV tuned to a rerun. He raised a hand. "Hey kid." That was Dad's full emotional range before dinner. Mom was on the phone in the dining room. I heard her before I saw her, that warm church committee voice she reserved for people who weren't family. "Oh, the fundraiser numbers look wonderful, Pastor. I've been managing the books myself. Yes, everything is right on track for the annual review." My jaw tightened. I'd been managing those books for 3 years. Every receipt, every reconciliation, every quarterly report filed under Helen Foster campaign chair, because Mom's name was on the committee letterhead and mine wasn't. I set down my bags and waited. She hung up, turned, saw me standing in the kitchen doorway. "No hello, no thank you for coming." "Good, you're here." She pointed to a legal pad on the counter. "Grocery list. Start tonight so tomorrow morning you can focus on the main dishes. 3 pages. Handwritten. Appetizers for 50, 3 entrees, 2 types of salad, rolls from scratch, a 3-tier birthday cake." I stared at the list and realized this wasn't going to be helping with a party. This was full-service catering, unpaid, unacknowledged, and already assigned. I started at 7 that evening and didn't stop until midnight. Marinated chicken thighs for 50, 9 pounds, 2 batches of my grandmother's herb rub, sealed and refrigerated. 2 enormous bowls of pasta salad, covered in plastic wrap. 3 dozen dinner rolls mixed, risen, punched down, shaped, and set on trays for the morning's second rise. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and yeast and effort. My forearms ached. Flour dusted the apron I'd tied on 5 hours earlier. Around 9, Dad wandered in. He stood in the doorway and watched me knead dough, hands in his pockets. Need a hand? I looked up. Yes. Can you chop the onions for the coleslaw? He reached for the knife block. From the living room, Mom's voice. Ray, come see this. They're showing the church renovation on the 11 o'clock preview. Dad's hand stopped. He glanced at me, mouthed the word sorry, and walked out. I chopped the onions myself. Tears streamed down my face, and I let people think it was the onions for years afterward. At midnight, I washed every pot, wiped every counter, swept the floor. The house was asleep. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the one with track trophies from Ridgewood High on the shelf, and a framed CPA certificate I'd brought home 2 Christmases ago so Mom could see it. The certificate sat where I'd placed it, on the top shelf next to a participation ribbon from a church bake sale. A fine layer of dust covered the glass. Mom had never moved it. She'd also never cleaned it. I set my phone alarm for 5, pulled the childhood quilt over my shoulders, and closed my eyes. 5 a.m. came fast. I was back in the kitchen before anyone else stirred, checking the rolls, sliding the first batch into the oven, starting the pulled pork in the slow cooker. By 9, I had 4 dishes running simultaneously, timers staggered on my phone like a flight controller managing departures. A skill I'd picked up working the line at Bistro Nola during college, the summer I paid for my CPA exam prep by plating 200 covers a night. Megan and Derek pulled up at 10. I watched through the kitchen window as Megan emerged from the car carrying a bottle of wine and a gift bag tied with ribbon. Derek carried nothing. They came through the side door. Megan hugged me, one arm, careful not to press against my flour-streaked apron. Smells incredible. You're so talented at this. Thanks. Can you set up the folding tables in the yard? Mom rented 6. They're in the garage. Megan tilted her head. Let me shower first. Long drive. Derek drifted toward the living room. I'll just say hi to your dad. Neither came back. I set up 6 folding tables and 50 chairs by myself, carrying them 2 at a time from the garage to the backyard, then back inside to flip the pork, check the rolls, start the coleslaw. Noon. Tablecloths down, napkins folded, serving station assembled. Sweat soaked through my shirt beneath the apron. I found Megan in the living room, shoes off, scrolling her phone, legs tucked under her on the couch. Meg, I need help bringing out the chairs. She didn't look up. Mom said you had it covered. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I turned around and went back outside to finish alone. 2 o'clock. The party was 8 hours away. I found Mom in the dining room arranging flower centerpieces, the one task she'd assigned herself all weekend. White carnations in mason jars. She hummed a church hymn while she trimmed stems. Mom. She didn't look up. I've been cooking and setting up since 5 this morning. I need Megan and Derek to take over dessert prep. Megan has a stressful job, honey. She needs to relax this weekend. I have a job too. She looked up then. The same thin smile she'd been giving me since I announced I was going freelance. Not hostile. Worse, pitying, indulgent. The expression you'd give a child who says they want to be an astronaut. You're the only one without a real job. She said it the way you'd say water is wet. Factual. Obvious. Barely worth mentioning. Then she went back to her carnations. I walked to the kitchen, stood at the sink, gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. I'd heard versions of this before, pointed comments at Thanksgiving about my little experiment, careful questions at Easter about when I'd go back to a real office, but never this plainly, never used as a reason, as the logical explanation for why I, specifically, should be the one standing in a hot kitchen for 2 days while everyone else sat in air conditioning. She hadn't even said it with cruelty. That was the part that burned. She believed it. It was simply a fact in her world. Megan had a real job and therefore deserved rest. Andrea did not, and therefore did not. I picked up the knife and went back to chopping. Saturday evening, the cooking was done. Trays covered in foil, the cake assembled and chilling, rolls bagged. The yard was set. The house smelled like a restaurant. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up QuickBooks. The Ridgewood Community Church Capital Campaign. 3 years of transactions I'd entered, reconciled, and reported under Mom's name. This was my comfort zone. Numbers didn't have opinions about my career. I'd started volunteering on the church books when Mom took over the fundraiser chairmanship. She'd held up the ledger at the first committee meeting and said she'd handle the finances personally. 2 days later, she'd called me. "Andrea, can you just set up a spreadsheet? I'm not good with computers." The spreadsheet became a full chart of accounts. The chart of accounts became monthly reconciliation. The reconciliation became quarterly reports to the audit committee. 3 years. 3 annual reviews where Mom sat at the head of the conference table in the church basement and walked through numbers she hadn't calculated, using terms I'd taught her, in a presentation I'd formatted. My phone buzzed. Text from Gerald Whitman, the church's elder treasurer. Gerald was a retired bank manager. Careful, decent, the kind of man who double-checked his own grocery receipts. "Diane mentioned the books are all in order for the annual review. Just confirming. Audit committee meets in 2 weeks. All good?" I typed back. "Working on final reconciliation now. I'll have the report ready." His reply. "Thank you, Andrea. Diane speaks very highly of your help." Help. I reread that word 3 times. 3 years. 14 quarterly reports. 1 complete audit defense. And I was the help. Late Saturday night, I stepped onto the back porch with my phone. The yard was set for tomorrow. Tables gleaming under the porch light, chairs in neat rows, citronella torches planted along the fence. I'd done all of it. I called Lena. "You're still there?" she said. "I'm still here." "Andrea, you're catering a 50-person party for free. You know what you'd charge a stranger for this kind of work?" I did know. I'd quoted similar events for a friend's nonprofit gala last month. "That's not why I'm here. Megan turns 37 tomorrow." "And Megan hasn't peeled a single potato, has she?" Silence from my end. We both knew the answer. "You know what you should do?" Lena's voice shifted. Sharper, the tone she used when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. "At the party tomorrow, stand up in front of everyone and tell them exactly how many hours you've worked this weekend. Every dish, every table, every load you carried alone. Let the 50 guests hear it." "I'm not doing that." "Why not? You've earned the right." "Because that's what Mom would do." I said it before I thought about it. But it was true. Mom was an expert at public audiences, at making someone defend themselves in front of people while she stood calm and righteous. If I stood up at that party and gave a speech about my suffering, I'd be using her playbook. And I'd lose. Because she'd cry and the room would comfort her, not me. "Promise me one thing," Lena said. "If she says something awful tomorrow, you walk. Don't argue. Don't give a speech. Just walk." I watched a moth circle the porch light. "I'll think about it." I stood on that porch and told myself it would be fine. One more day. Smile, serve the food, go home. But something had already shifted between that morning and that phone call. I kept thinking about what Lena said, what I'd charge a stranger for the work I'd been doing for free since Friday. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while everyone else watches, subscribe and keep listening. Sunday. Party day. I was up again at 5, 3rd morning in a row on 4 hours of sleep. The face staring back at me from the kitchen window looked 10 years older, dark circles, unwashed hair pulled back, the same apron from Friday now stained past saving. I started the final push. A massive pot of chili, Megan's favorite, simmered on the back burner. Pulled pork came out of the slow cooker, shredded and sauced. 3 batches of coleslaw, dressed and refrigerated. The 3-tier birthday cake needed its final layer of frosting. I piped roses around the base with a steady hand and a number 104 tip, each petal a deliberate turn of the wrist. I'd taught myself patisserie from YouTube tutorials during those first jobless months, filling the hours between sending out proposals that went unanswered. The roses weren't perfect, but they were close, and I was proud of close. Mom came downstairs at 8. She walked to the cake, leaned in, squinted. The roses are a little uneven on this side. Then she poured herself coffee and went to the porch. No good morning. No, that looks beautiful. No thank you for the 18 hours you've spent in my kitchen. I adjusted the roses. They weren't uneven. I'd checked them twice. But I adjusted them anyway, because some part of me still believed that if I got the roses right, if I got everything right, she might look at what I'd built and say the thing I'd been waiting to hear since I turned in my CPA exam scores. I'm proud of you. She never said it. Not that morning. Not any morning. But I piped those roses like she might. Cars began pulling up at noon. The Hendersons from down the street, a group from Megan's office, church friends, neighbors I recognized from years of Sunday dinners I'd helped cook. 50 people filing through the front door while I loaded platters in the kitchen. Mom stood at the entrance like a hostess at a 5-star restaurant. Welcome, come in. We've been cooking all weekend. I heard it through the steam rising from the chili pot. Helen, this spread is incredible. That was Mrs. Aldridge from across the street, 78 years old and sharp as a tax audit. You did all this? Mom waved her hand. Oh, you know me. I can't sit still. I stood 3 feet behind her, holding a tray of pulled pork sliders, sweat beading on my upper lip. Mrs. Aldridge's eyes shifted to me over Mom's shoulder. She held my gaze for a beat. The kind of look a woman gives another woman when she sees exactly what's happening and can't say it out loud. Then she took a slider and moved on. I retreated to the kitchen. Through the window, I watched it all unfold. Megan opening presents in a circle of friends, Derek pouring drinks by the cooler, Dad in his lawn chair telling a story about the old Ford plant. 50 people eating food I'd cooked, sitting in chairs I'd carried, under tablecloths I'd pressed. Nobody came back to the kitchen. Nobody asked if I needed water or a break or a chair of my own. The dishwasher was already running its second cycle and the party was only an hour in. I wiped down the counter for the 3rd time and thought, it's not the work I resent. It's the disappearing. Brief lull between entrees and dessert. I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The church books were due soon, and I needed to finish the reconciliation. Numbers were steady ground. Nobody questioned your value when the balance sheet tied. I scrolled through the capital campaign ledger. 3 years of contributions, expenses, vendor payments. Most entries were clean. I'd entered them myself after all. But scattered through Mom's direct entries, the ones she'd made when I was busy or between visits. Something caught my accountant's eye. Miscellaneous event supplies, $380. No receipt attached. I flagged it and moved on. Decorations and outreach materials, $290. Also no receipt. Community event coordination, $450. Same problem. I pulled up a filter. Every expense Mom had entered personally. About 40 entries across 3 years. 14 of them had no supporting documentation, vague category names, round numbers, all reimbursed to H. Foster. Total. Roughly $2,200. I sat back. I knew what this was. Mom genuinely spent money on the fundraiser. Flowers, printed flyers, rented folding tables for bake sales, stamps for thank you cards. She spent it out of her own pocket and reimbursed herself from the campaign fund. That's standard. But she never kept receipts. She rounded up. She used categories so vague they'd collapse under any scrutiny. It wasn't theft. Mom didn't pocket church money, but if an auditor who didn't know her opened this spreadsheet, they'd see 14 unexplained reimbursements to the campaign chair, and they'd have questions. Questions Mom couldn't answer, because Mom didn't know how the answers worked. I'd been filling in the gaps for 3 years, adding my own notes, cross-referencing event dates to justify entries, building the paper trail she never built. I found Mom in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. The party hummed behind the closed door. Laughter, music, forks on plates. I kept my voice low. Mom, I need to talk to you about the church books. There are about $2,200 in expenses without receipts. The audit is in 2 weeks. I need you to find those receipts or write a memo explaining each one. She didn't stop walking. Not now, Andrea. We have guests. This isn't optional. If the audit committee sees entries without documentation, I handled it. The words came out sharp, a slap in the middle of a sentence. She stopped, turned, gave me the look she used when I was 13, and asked too many questions about why she'd never gone back to nursing school. Shut it down. Final. No appeal. You didn't handle it, I said, matching her volume. I handle it. Every year. And every year you take the numbers I prepare and present them to Gerald's committee as if you sat at a desk and did the work. Her face hardened. Not embarrassment, but something closer to threat. The cornered look of a woman whose authority is questioned in her own house. Lower your voice. This is Megan's day. She walked back to the party. I stood in the hallway, alone, the party noise bleeding through the door like pressure in my ears. I'd tried. That mattered. Not because it changed anything, but because later, when the weight of what came next pressed down, I needed to know I'd given her a chance. She chose the flowers. She chose the thin smile and the hallway exit and the assumption that someone else, meaning me, would fix it. An hour later, Derek appeared in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. Andrea, this is ridiculous. You've been in here all day. Let me take over the grill. There's still burgers to flip. Relief hit me so fast it was almost dizzying. Someone saw. Someone was standing in the doorway offering hands. Thank you. The burgers need flipping every 3 minutes, and the buns are warming in the lower oven. Megan materialized behind him like she'd been summoned by the sound of offered help. Derek, what are you doing? Come on, the Hendersons want to meet you. She looked past him to me. You've got this, right? Derek glanced back at me. I watched the calculation happen in real time, his wife's expectation on one side, my sweat-stained apron on the other. He mouthed something that might have been sorry and followed Megan out. The kitchen door swung shut. 3 times now. 3 separate people had moved toward helping me. Dad reached for the knife and Mom called him away. Derek rolled up his sleeves and Megan pulled him back. Megan herself had promised we'd all pitch in and then vanished into a hot shower at 10 in the morning. 3 times, and every time the same invisible hand redirected them away from my kitchen and back to the party. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't laziness. Mom had built a system, casually, over decades, where Andrea's labor was assumed. Andrea's time was unscheduled, and anyone who disrupted that assumption was gently steered away before they could change the equation. I flipped the burgers myself. The char marks came out perfect. Nobody would ever know the grill had been worked by one pair of tired hands. I needed extra serving spoons for the dessert course. The good ones, the long-handled silver-plated set Grandma Foster had left, were in the deep junk drawer by the refrigerator, the one Mom kept meaning to clean out but never did. I pulled the drawer open and started digging. Expired coupons for a pizza place that closed in 2022. Takeout menus from restaurants we'd stopped ordering from. A rubber band ball. Dead batteries. A birthday card Megan had sent 3 years ago, still in the envelope, unopened. Then my hand brushed something. A small notepad page, torn at the top, folded once. Mom's handwriting. I unfolded it. Richard Brennan called. Partner position available for Andrea. Told him Andrea decided to step back from accounting. January 14th, 2025. I read it. Read it again. Then a third time, slowly, the way you read a medical diagnosis because the words won't settle into meaning. January 14th, 18 months ago. I'd left Brennan and Associates 2 months before that, voluntarily, on good terms to start my own practice. Richard Brennan was the founding partner, my mentor, the man who signed my CPA recommendation letter. He'd called to offer me a partner position, and Mom had answered the landline, the backup number still listed in my old firm file from when I was switching phone providers that month, and told him I wasn't interested. I'd called Richard that July. Casual. Testing the waters. "I thought you'd moved on from accounting, Andrea," he'd said. "Your mother mentioned you'd decided to pursue other things." The conversation lasted under 3 minutes. I'd never understood his coolness. Now I held the explanation in my hand. I folded the note, slid it into my back pocket, and whispered to nobody. Someone has to do it right. I served the cake with steady hands, cut 50 slices, set each one on a paper plate with a plastic fork, carried trays to the yard while guests sang happy birthday, and Megan blew out candles shaped like a 3 and a 7. Nobody saw the note in my pocket. Nobody saw the shift behind my eyes. I was good at that, at running the numbers in my head while my hands did something else entirely. Partner at Brennan and Associates. I'd looked up comparable positions when I left, base salary in the low 90s, benefits, profit sharing, a corner office with the window overlooking the Morristown Green. Gone. Rerouted by a woman who answered a phone that wasn't hers and spoke for a daughter who wasn't asked. I could confront Mom now. Pull out the note, hold it up in front of 50 guests, say the words, "You stole my career." Lena's voice echoed. "Stand up and tell them." I had the ammunition. The note was proof. Handwritten, dated, undeniable. But I kept coming back to the same calculation. If I confronted Mom at this party, she'd cry. She was brilliant at crying on cue, not faking it exactly, but accelerating a genuine emotion into a spectacle that redirected the room's sympathy toward her. 50 guests would watch me, the unemployed daughter, wave a crumpled note at her exhausted mother during a birthday party. And they would comfort her. Because that's what an audience does when someone cries in public. They sighed with the tears. I needed a different equation. One where the numbers did the talking and the audience wasn't mine to persuade. I texted Lena one line. "You were right. About everything." She texted back. "About what?" I put the phone away and served seconds. The party ended around 8. Cars pulled away one by one, taillights fading down Maple Lane. Megan hugged Mom, hugged Dad, hugged me last. "Best birthday ever. Thank you, Andrea. Seriously." She meant it. That was the complicated part. Megan meant every thank you she ever gave me. She just never thought about why the thank you was always pointed in my direction and never in anyone else's. Derek loaded their car. Megan waved from the passenger window. Gone. Mom announced she was going to bed. "I'm exhausted. What a day." She climbed the stairs without looking back at the kitchen. I looked at the kitchen. Every surface covered. Platters crusted with dried sauce, glasses sticky with lemonade, the slow cooker coated in a ring of chili residue. The backyard, 50 chairs, 6 tables, napkins caught in the hedges, citronella torches still burning. Dad mumbled something about being tired and shuffled to the bedroom. I started washing. 10 o'clock. 11. The hot water ran out and I switched to cold. My lower back throbbed. Sometime after 11, I stepped away to use the bathroom. When I came back, the remaining dishes were done. The counter, wiped. The slow cooker, soaking in clean water. And on the drying rack, balanced against a clean plate, a yellow sticky note in Dad's handwriting. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Dad." I held it for a long time. 2 notes today. One from Mom, a record of sabotage hidden in a junk drawer. One from Dad, an apology left in secret while the person he owed it to wasn't watching. Both written when no one else could see. Both proving the same thing. Everyone in this house knew exactly what they were doing to me. They just couldn't do it out loud. Monday morning. I should have driven home last night, but exhaustion pinned me to the childhood mattress like a physical weight. I woke to the sound of Mom's footsteps downstairs. Coffee maker, cabinet doors, the muffled rhythm of someone else's morning routine. My old bedroom. Track trophies. The dusty CPA certificate. A life I'd grown out of. preserved in amber by a woman who wanted to keep me small enough to fit inside it. I showered, dressed, sat on the bed with my laptop. The church books were still open. The Capital Campaign ledger, with its 14 unreceipted entries, its $2,200 in vague reimbursements. The audit was 13 days away. I'd done this before, 3 times. Each year I'd spent hours adding my own research notes to Mom's entries, cross-referencing dates with church event calendars, matching vague descriptions to actual purchases, building a justification trail that transformed sloppy bookkeeping into clean documentation. Hours of professional work, unpaid, unacknowledged, filed under Mom's name. I could do it again. Open the entries, attach my notes, make the numbers presentable, protect her the way I'd been protecting her since I first sat down at this spreadsheet. Or I could stop. Not alter anything, not sabotage, not delete, not add false information. Just stop supplementing. Remove my professional work product, my notes, my cross-references, my justification memos, and leave the raw ledger exactly as Mom's entries appeared. Vague, unreceipted, unexplained. If the audit committee reviewed the raw data, they'd have questions. Questions Mom couldn't answer because she'd never learned the answers. I'd always supplied them. I wasn't going to destroy my mother. I was going to stop being her shield. I saved the file, closed the laptop, started packing my bag. I sat in my old bedroom with 2 notes in my pocket. One that proved my mother had sabotaged my career, one that proved my father knew and couldn't stop her. I had the church books on my screen and a decision forming in my chest. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone who hurt you and protecting yourself, keep watching. And if this story is hitting close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I made it as far as the front door. Bag on my shoulder, keys in my hand, car visible through the screen. Mom appeared in the hallway behind me like she'd been waiting for the sound of a zipper. "Where are you going? The yard still needs cleaning up. And I told Mrs. Aldridge you'd drop off her leftover containers today. I have client work. I need to go home." Client work. She said it the way you'd say imaginary friend. Not mocking, exactly, but bracketed in gentle disbelief. "Your little computer thing can wait, Andrea. This is family." I should have walked out then. I knew it. My hand was on the door handle and my car was right there, 20 feet of concrete between me and freedom. But Mrs. Aldridge was 78, and she'd asked about the containers specifically, and Mom knew I wouldn't leave an elderly neighbor hanging. That was the mechanism, the elegant, invisible machine Mom had built over decades. She never forced me to do anything. She routed her requests through people I cared about. Megan's birthday, Dad's insurance forms, Mrs. Aldridge's containers, the church's reputation. She never had to say, "I order you." She just had to say, "But Mrs. Aldridge is expecting," and watch me fold. I delivered the containers. I drove across town with a trunk full of Tupperware and a note burning against my thigh, because a 78-year-old woman needed her serving bowls back, and I wasn't the kind of person who punished bystanders. That's the thing about being over-responsible. You know you're being used. You see the system. And you still can't walk past an undone thing without fixing it. Not out of weakness, out of standard. Mrs. Aldridge's kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner, the kind of clean that comes from a woman who's wiped her own counters every day for 50 years. She took the containers and set them on the table without inspecting them, which told me she hadn't actually needed them back today. "Sit down," she said, already pouring a second cup. "You look like you've been running someone else's marathon." I sat. The coffee was strong and the chair was comfortable, and for the first time in 3 days I wasn't standing. "That was some spread yesterday, Andrea. You did all the cooking, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Mom helped. Mrs. Aldridge gave me a look over her glasses, the kind of look that says I've been alive long enough to know when someone's protecting a lie. "Honey, I've known your mother 30 years. Helen Foster does not cook. She orchestrates. I saw you through the kitchen window yesterday. You were in there alone for the entire party." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. I was a bookkeeper for 40 years, she said. County clerk's office, then private practice. You know what I learned? She topped off my cup without asking. The person doing the numbers is invisible until the numbers go wrong, then suddenly everyone remembers they exist. I felt those words settle somewhere deep, in the same place where the church ledger and Richard Brennan's phone call and Mom's junk drawer note all lived, orbiting each other like planets around a truth I hadn't named yet. Don't let them make you invisible, dear. You're worth more than that. I drove home with the windows down. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something worse than angry. I was clear. My apartment felt different when I walked in. Smaller, but mine. I sat at my desk, pulled out the note, and smoothed it flat on the wood surface. Mom's handwriting, slanting right. The same penmanship she used for church thank you cards and grocery lists. The same hand that signed my permission slips in 4th grade. I picked up the phone and called Richard Brennan. He answered on the second ring. Andrea, been a while. Richard, I found something. In January last year. Did you call my parents' house about a position? Quiet. The kind of quiet that means someone is choosing their words carefully. I did. Partner track. We'd been impressed with your client retention numbers, and I thought, well, your mother answered. She said you'd decided to step away from accounting, pursue other interests. I didn't press. I respected what I thought was your choice. I never got that message. My mother never told me. Another pause. Longer. I could hear him recalibrating, the same way I recalibrated when a client's numbers suddenly told a different story than the one they'd been presenting. Andrea, I don't know what to say. The position was filled in March. I understand. I kept my voice level. Professional. CPA mode. Is anything available now? Not partner track. But I have a senior consultant opening. Solid salary, benefits, clear trajectory. If you're interested, and given what you've just told me, I'd like to meet this week. I'll be there. I hung up, sat in my apartment with the afternoon sun warming the desk and the traffic sounds drifting up from the street below. For the first time in 18 months, the hallway I thought had ended at a wall had a door. Not the same door. Not the corner office. But a door. And it was ajar. And I'd opened it myself. The following Sunday I went to family dinner. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to see the machine from the outside now that I knew how it worked. I brought a store-bought pie. Grocery label still on it. Mom's eyebrows rose when I set it on the counter, but she said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Dinner was pot roast. Mom's recipe, the one she actually could make. We sat around the dining table. Mom, Dad, Megan, Derek, me. Conversation wandered the way it always did. Megan's office gossip, Dad's opinion about the neighbor's fence, Mom's recap of the church committee meeting. Then Derek, reaching for more bread, turned to me. Andrea, how's the freelance business? Megan said you've been picking up more clients. Before I could open my mouth, Mom cut in. Smooth, practiced, the verbal equivalent of stepping in front of someone. Andrea's still figuring things out. She picked up her wine glass, took a sip, then added, to Derek specifically, with the same flat certainty she'd used in the kitchen. She's the only one without a real job, you know. But she keeps busy. The table went quiet. Derek studied his plate. Megan examined her wine glass like it contained the answer to a question nobody had asked. Dad looked at the wall behind my head, his jaw working around nothing. I set my fork down. Carefully. The way you set down something fragile when you've decided you're not going to break it. You're going to leave it behind. I need to get going. Thank you for dinner. I stood up. Mom blinked. Already? You just got here. Not worried. Annoyed. I walked to the front door and closed it behind me. Not a slam. A click. A latch settling into place for the last time. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. The porch light threw a yellow rectangle across the dashboard. I pulled out my phone. First call. Lena. It rang twice. She said it again, in front of Derek. Lena exhaled. Andrea. Same words, same voice, like she was reading a weather report. Are you going to tell them about the note? About Richard? No. Then what? I watched a moth bump against the porch light, stupid with persistence. I'm going to stop doing the job she says I don't have. I hung up before Lena could respond and dialed the second number. Gerald Whitman picked up on the fourth ring. Gerald, it's Andrea Foster. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday evening. I need to let you know that effective today, I'm stepping down from managing the church capital campaign books. A pause. Andrea, is everything all right? I also need to flag something for the audit committee. There are approximately $2,200 in expenses across 3 years that lack receipts or adequate documentation. I've been supplementing the records with my own research notes, cross-references, event date verification, justification memos. But those notes represent my professional work product. I'll be removing them when I hand over the raw files. Removing? Meaning the explanations won't be there? The raw ledger will reflect exactly what was entered by the campaign chair. You'll want to have the audit committee review it before the annual meeting. Long silence. I could almost hear Gerald's banker brain processing the implications. Andrea, I appreciate your transparency. Can I come by to discuss this in person? You should really be discussing it with Helen. She's the chair. I understand. I started the car and drove home. Lena showed up at my apartment that evening with a bottle of wine I didn't ask for and opinions I hadn't requested. We sat on the tiny balcony, 2 chairs, 1 wobbly table, a view of the dry cleaner's back wall, and a strip of sky. You have the note, Lena said, pouring. You have the church books. You could walk into next Sunday's dinner and lay it all out. Hold up the note. Read it to Megan. Let her see exactly who your mother is. I took the glass, held it without drinking. I've been thinking about that. And it's what Mom would do. She'd make it a performance. She'd put someone on trial in front of an audience with no warning and force them to defend themselves in real time. She's spent 30 years perfecting that move. I drank. Set the glass down. If I stand in my parents' dining room waving a crumpled note, I become her. Different target, same weapon. I'm not going to use her playbook, Lena. Not because she doesn't deserve it, because I don't deserve to become that. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then what was the point of calling Gerald? Gerald is the church treasurer. His job, literally his elected responsibility, is to review the books. I gave him accurate information and removed my unpaid professional work from the equation. If the numbers Mom entered can stand on their own, she'll be fine. If they can't, that's not my problem anymore. That's not revenge. It's... I searched for the word. Accountability, Lena offered. I was going to say math. She stared at me over her wine glass. You're absolutely terrifying, you know that? I'm an accountant. It's the same thing. I didn't know exactly when Gerald went to see Mom. I found out Tuesday evening when Megan called. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to ask questions without revealing how much they already know. Something's going on with Mom. Some man from the church came by yesterday. Gerald? She's been weird ever since. Snappy. Won't talk about it. Gerald is the church treasurer. If he visited, it's about the fundraiser. Mom said you did something to the church books. She said you sabotaged her. I let the accusation sit for a moment. Sabotaged, as if removing my own unpaid labor from someone else's ledger constituted an attack. I resigned from managing the books. That's not sabotage, Megan. That's quitting a volunteer position. Andrea, what is going on? This feels bigger than church accounting. First time Megan had pushed. First time she'd sensed there was a floor beneath the floor, a story beneath the story she'd been told her whole life. Ask Mom about a note in the junk drawer, January 14th last year. Her handwriting. What note? Ask Mom. I hung up. Not to be cruel, I was done doing other people's homework. For 33 years I'd been the one who investigated, who compiled, who translated complicated situations into simple explanations for people who never asked to understand until the consequences arrived. If Megan wanted to see the truth, she'd have to pull open the drawer herself. I'd spent 3 days cooking for her party, 3 years managing books for Mom, and 18 months grieving a career opportunity I never knew existed. The least Megan could do was open a drawer. Bin. Megan went to the house the next day. She told me this later, in pieces, over lunch at a restaurant neither of us had been to before. She'd gone looking for the note. The junk drawer was clean. Mom had emptied it, wiped it down, reorganized it with fresh shelf liner. Megan almost stopped there, almost accepted the clean drawer as proof that there was nothing to find. But she'd heard something in my voice, a flatness, a finality, that wouldn't let her stop looking. She checked the recycling bin, the trash under the kitchen sink, the paper bag Mom kept for shredding. And there, crumpled between a credit card statement and a Bed Bath & Beyond flyer, she found it. Mom's handwriting. Richard Brennan. Partner position. Told him Andrea decided to step back from accounting. January 14th. Megan walked into the living room where Mom sat watching a home renovation show. Mom, what is this? Mom saw the note. Her face went white, then flushed deep red, the color of someone whose carefully maintained wall has just been breached. Where did you find that? In the trash. You threw it away? Mom sat up straighter. The defense was instant, reflexive, like a muscle memory. She wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. She'd just left the firm. She needed time to... You decided that for her? Without telling her? I'm her mother. I know what's best. Is this why you keep calling her unemployed? Because you made sure she stayed that way? Mom started to cry. Not quietly. The kind of crying that fills a room and demands that everyone stop what they're doing and attend to the person crying. After everything I've done for this family. But Megan didn't reach for the tissue box. She just stood there, holding the note. Mom called me 4 times that evening. I watched each call light up my screen and let it ring through to voicemail. She texted, "Call me right now." I read it, set the phone face down on my desk, and went back to preparing a client's quarterly filing. She called Megan next. "Tell your sister to pick up the phone." Megan told me this later with a kind of exhausted wonder, as if she'd suddenly been given glasses and could see the machinery she'd been living inside her whole life. "I told her to call you herself. And I told her to explain the note while she was at it." "Mom, she's blowing this out of proportion. It was one phone call. I was protecting her." Megan, for the first time in 37 years of deferring to the woman who raised her. Protecting her from what, Mom? A partnership? A real salary? She's been cooking your meals, doing your taxes, managing the church books? And you sabotaged her career, and then called her unemployed? Mom's final defense. "The church books are fine, I handled it." But the tremor in her voice said otherwise. Gerald's visit had cracked something. The audit was coming, the notes were gone, and the daughter who'd been fixing everything was no longer picking up the phone. Thursday. Gerald sent an email. Professional, measured, the tone of a man who'd spent 40 years in banking and knew how to deliver bad news in calibrated language. Addressed to Mom. CC, Pastor Williams, Elder Margaret Cook, Elder David Park. Subject line, Capital Campaign, Expedited Review. The body was brief. Given discrepancies flagged by the outgoing volunteer bookkeeper, the audit committee was moving its annual review from the originally scheduled date to this Saturday. All financial records, receipts, and supporting documentation should be prepared and available. Mom called me at 7 that morning. I picked up this time, because this was a professional matter and I answered professional calls. Her voice was stripped raw. "You need to fix this. Put your notes back in the files. The audit is Saturday." "Those notes represented my professional work, Mom. Work you told 50 people I don't do." "This is different. This is the church. The raw ledger is accurate. If your expenses are legitimate, you'll have no trouble explaining them to Gerald and the committee." "You know I can't explain them." Her voice cracked. "I don't have the receipts. You always..." She stopped, heard herself. The sentence she'd been about to finish was, "You always took care of it." She'd been about to admit, out loud, to the daughter she called jobless, that the daughter's job was the only thing standing between her and accountability. "Yes," I said. "I always did." Silence. I could hear her breathing, ragged, uneven. The sound of a woman realizing that the shield she'd been mocking was the only thing between her and the arrow. "If you'd like to hire me as a professional bookkeeper to prepare your audit response, my rate is $75 an hour. That's what I charge my clients, the ones who give me real jobs." I hung up. Carefully. The way you close a ledger when the numbers are final. Saturday morning, I was at my desk in my apartment, working on Lena's tax filing. Steady, focused work, the kind that pays the bills Mom said didn't exist. I'd made a decision not to attend the church audit. This wasn't my performance. I'd built the stage, placed the actors, and stepped off into the wings. What happened next belonged to the numbers. Gerald called that afternoon. His voice carried the careful neutrality of a man reporting facts he wished were different. The audit committee had convened at 10. They'd reviewed the raw ledger. 14 entries flagged. Vague descriptions. No receipts. Reimbursements to the campaign chair totaling $2,200. Mom was asked to explain. She tried. "I handled it. I've always handled the fundraiser." Gerald said she repeated that phrase several times, each time with less conviction, until it sounded less like a defense and more like an echo bouncing off walls that weren't there anymore. The committee didn't accuse her of theft. Gerald was careful to emphasize that. They understood Helen Foster had likely spent her own money on legitimate expenses, but the record-keeping was insufficient. The documentation trail was non-existent. Trust, the currency of church governance, was damaged. They asked her to step down as campaign chair pending a full reconciliation. She could remain a committee member. She could attend services. But the title, the authority, the front-of-the-room position she'd built her post-retirement identity around, that was gone. "Andrea, may I ask?" Gerald said. "Did you know this would happen when you stepped away?" I considered the question, gave it the honest answer. I knew that without me cleaning up the books would show exactly what they are. "And you still resigned?" "Someone has to do it right, Gerald, and someone has to let the wrong things be seen." Saturday afternoon. My phone lit up. Megan. I answered, and what came through the speaker was the sound from the beginning of this story. The sound I opened with. The sobbing that meant something had broken past fixing. "Who did you call?" Megan's voice was raw, shredded. "Mom just came home from the church and Andrea, she's on her knees in the living room. She keeps saying, 'I handled it, I handled it.' And Dad is just standing there. Gerald was here. Oh my God, she lost the fundraiser. Andrea, what happened?" "I stopped handling it for her, Megan. That's what happened." "But why? Why now? Why like this?" "Ask Mom about January 14th. Ask her what she told Richard Brennan when he called about a partnership for me. Ask her how she spent 3 years presenting my numbers to the church committee, and then stood in her own kitchen and told 50 people I don't have a real job." Megan was quiet for a long time. I listened to her breathe. Somewhere in the background I could hear Mom, not the composed church committee voice, not the thin-smiled hostess. Something raw and unfamiliar. The sound of a woman whose audience had finally seen what was behind the curtain. "The note," Megan said. "The note." Another silence. Then, small and cracked and honest. "Andrea, I'm sorry, I should have seen it." "You're seeing it now." That was all I said. It was enough. Mom called that evening. I answered because there was nothing left to protect. Not her reputation, not my patience, not the careful fiction that our family worked the way families are supposed to work. Her voice was used up, emptied. "Are you happy now?" "No, Mom. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in a long time. I was trying to protect you. You weren't ready for... You were protecting yourself." I said it quietly. No accusation. No heat. Just the final line of an audit that had been running in my head for 18 months. If I succeeded on my own, it meant you could have too, and you couldn't live with that. Silence. She didn't deny it. That absence, that hollow where a defense should have been, told me more than any confession. She couldn't argue with the math. I love you, Mom, but I'm done being invisible so you can feel visible. I hung up, set the phone on my desk, looked at the evening light falling across my spreadsheets, my client folders, the framed CPA certificate I'd moved from Mom's dusty shelf to my own wall. The dust was gone. The glass was clean. 3 months later, I sat in a conference room at Brennan and Associates and signed my offer letter. Senior consultant. $82,000 a year. Benefits. A desk by the window that looked out on the Morristown Green. Not the corner office, but close enough to see the trees change color. Richard Brennan shook my hand and said something I'll carry for a long time. We should have tried harder to reach you. That's on us too. I didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. It wasn't. But blame is a ledger I'd stopped keeping. Mom was removed as campaign chair. The church appointed Martha Hollins, a retired school principal with an organized mind and a filing system that made Gerald smile for the first time in months. They also hired a part-time professional bookkeeper, 20 hours a week, paid from the operating budget. The $2,200 was eventually reconciled. Mom produced some receipts, wrote personal checks for the entries she couldn't document, and submitted a letter of explanation that Gerald described as sincere, but insufficient. She wasn't banned from the church. She still attended. But she no longer sat in the front pew or arrived early to arrange the hymnals. She came late and left quietly, and the congregation noticed the way congregations always notice, with polite silence and averted eyes. Dad called me twice in those 3 months. Short conversations, his sentences clipped and careful, like a man walking across a frozen lake. He never apologized again. But the second time he called, he asked about my new position, and when I told him the salary, he said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo." And his voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't enough. It would never undo 33 years of silence, but it was Ray Foster's version of everything he had. Megan took me to lunch at a restaurant in Montclair. Neutral ground, neither of our kitchens. She cried into her Caesar salad and said, "I never asked because I assumed everything was fine. I'm not going to assume anymore." She started doing her own taxes that April. Derek texted me a week after the audit. For what it's worth, I tried to help with the burgers. I should have tried harder. I texted back, "You should have." I used to think strength was staying. Showing up at 5 in the morning, cooking for 50, smiling while someone called my life a hobby. I thought if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, they'd eventually see me. But that's not strength. That's a transaction where you keep paying and they never check the bill. Strength is knowing the exact cost of what you give and choosing who deserves it. That's where Andrea's story ends. For now. A junk drawer note. A 3-tier birthday cake no one thanked her for. A single phone call that changed which foster woman the church trusted with its money. If you've ever been the one doing the invisible work while someone else took the bow, share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge. Because the quiet ones always have the best receipts.